You keep telling yourself this time will be different. Different plan, different mindset, different version of you. And for a moment, it almost feels real. Then somehow, you're right back where you started. Same patterns, same reactions, same excuses that sound reasonable enough to believe again. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. You don't fail to change because you lack discipline, confidence, or motivation. You fail because there are things you're still doing, automatically, that make real change impossible. Not obvious things, not bad habits everyone warns you about. Quiet, everyday behaviors that feel normal, responsible even. Things you probably think are helping you, and that's why they're dangerous. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Most people hear that and think it means digging into the past. It doesn't. It means noticing what you're repeating without questioning. The way you delay, the way you explain yourself, the way you protect an old version of you because at least it's familiar. And here's the part no one likes to admit. If you keep doing these things, no amount of insight will save you. You can understand yourself perfectly and still stay stuck. So, in this video, we're not talking about what you need to start doing. We're talking about what you need to stop doing immediately if you want real change to become unavoidable. There are 5 of them, and the last one is the reason most people never get past their own awareness. So before we talk about changing your habits, your mindset, or your life direction, we have to start with the first thing that quietly blocks everything else. Because if this one stays in place, nothing after it matters. This is where most people unknowingly stop themselves before they even begin. The first thing is waiting to feel ready. You keep telling yourself you're not ready yet, not ready to speak up, not ready to start, not ready to commit. And it sounds reasonable, responsible even. You're just being careful. You're waiting for clarity. You're giving yourself time. But here's the truth. Ready is not a state you arrive at. It's a feeling you chase to avoid discomfort. If you wait until you feel confident, certain, or fully prepared, you'll wait forever. Because readiness isn't what comes before change. It's what comes after movement. Most people don't realize this, but waiting to feel ready is often a way of protecting yourself from exposure, from being seen trying, from getting it wrong, from finding out you're not as capable as you hope. So you delay. You gather more information. You rehearse a future version of yourself who somehow feels different. Weeks pass, then months, and now starting feels heavier, because the longer you wait, the more meaning you attach to it. Failure starts to feel personal. Carl Jung put it bluntly, "There's no coming to consciousness without pain." Readiness is an illusion because growth requires friction. It requires acting before you feel stable. If you only move when it feels safe, you'll only ever repeat what's familiar. And here's the deeper issue most people miss. The habit of waiting trains your mind to trust hesitation more than action, which leads directly into the next thing you're still doing, the one that keeps you loyal to the version of yourself that no longer fits. If you've been waiting to feel ready, there's something else quietly reinforcing that delay. Because even when the opportunity shows up, even when part of you knows it's time, you hesitate for a different reason. Not fear of failure, fear of no longer being who you've been. Thing number 2, protecting an old identity. You don't just resist a change. You defend a version of yourself that people already understand. The dependable one, the agreeable one, the one who doesn't cause friction. And without realizing it, you start living in a way that keeps that image intact. You choose words that don't challenge expectations. You make decisions that won't surprise anyone. You downplay growth so it doesn't feel threatening to them or to you. This is the part most people miss. Your identity isn't just who you are, it's a contract, a silent agreement between you and the people around you about how you'll show up. Breaking that contract feels risky because if you change, someone might be confused, disappointed, or uncomfortable. And somewhere along the way, you learned that being understood felt safer than being honest. Carl Jung described this tension clearly. The individual who does not adapt himself to the collective is threatened with extinction. So you adapt, you adjust, you stay recognizable. But here's the cost. The longer you protect an outdated identity, the more energy it takes to maintain it. You start feeling tired in situations that shouldn't exhaust you, restless in roles that once felt natural, disconnected, without knowing why. That's not failure. That's misalignment. And the most dangerous part is this. You begin confusing loyalty to your past with integrity. But growth always asks the same uncomfortable question. Are you being consistent? Or are you just being familiar? And that question leads straight into the next thing you're still doing. The habit that keeps you explaining yourself instead of trusting your own direction. Once you start loosening your grip on an old identity, something else immediately takes its place. You feel the shift. Your choices change. Your priorities sharpen. And suddenly, people start asking questions. That's where the next habit sneaks in. The third thing is over-explaining yourself. You don't just say what you're doing. You justify it. You give context, background, reasons. Not because they asked, but because you feel the need to soften the impact. And the more you grow, the more you explain. On the surface, it looks like communication. Underneath, it's hesitation dressed up as clarity. Every explanation is a quiet request for permission. You're not just sharing your reasoning. You're checking whether your decision is acceptable. So you edit yourself in real time. You add disclaimers. You turn a simple boundary into a speech. Carl Jung once observed, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Because the moment you accept yourself, you stop negotiating your direction." Over-explaining is what happens when you trust other people's understanding more than your own judgment. You start measuring your choices by how easily they can be defended, instead of how deeply they feel right. And over time, this does something subtle but damaging. It trains you to doubt decisions that don't come with external approval. You hesitate before acting, not because you're unsure, but because you're imagining the conversation afterward. What will they think? How will this sound? How do I make this make sense? Eventually, you spend more energy managing reactions than moving forward. And here's the quiet cost. When you explain everything, you dilute the meaning of your actions. Clarity doesn't come from saying more. It comes from standing still long enough to let your choices speak. The less you explain, the more solid you become. And once you stop over-explaining, you run straight into the next trap, the one that convinces you that you're changing, when all you're really doing is thinking. When you stop over-explaining, something interesting happens. There's more silence, less commentary, fewer justifications. And in that quiet, you start noticing patterns you used to talk your way around. That's when most people make a subtle mistake. They mistake awareness for transformation. Thing number 4. Confusing insight with change. You see yourself more clearly now. You recognize your reactions. You can name your patterns the moment they appear. And that feels powerful. Understanding creates relief. It creates distance. It makes you feel in control. But insight, by itself, doesn't interrupt behavior. You can explain exactly why you avoid certain decisions and still avoid them. You can trace a reaction to its origin and repeat it the next day. Carl Jung warned about this illusion when he said, "Intellectualism is a common cover-up for fear." Because thinking about change is safer than risking it. So you analyze, you reflect, you collect language for what's happening inside you. And slowly, insight becomes a substitute for action. You tell yourself you're working on it. You feel productive without moving. You mistake clarity for courage. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Awareness only becomes change when it costs you something, when it forces a different response, when it interrupts a familiar pattern in real time. Otherwise, insight just sharpens your ability to narrate your own stagnation. And the longer you stay here, the harder it becomes to move. Because now your identity is built around being self-aware. You know the right words. You see the trap. You just don't step out of it. Real change doesn't ask for better explanations. It demands different behavior. And once you realize that, you're pushed toward the final thing you're still doing. The one that keeps pulling you back the moment discomfort shows up. Once you realize that insight alone doesn't change you, there's only one place left to look. Because every time real change gets close, something steps in and shuts it down. Not fear, not doubt, discomfort. The last thing is trying to eliminate discomfort. You tell yourself it shouldn't feel this tense, this uncertain, this exposed. So you look for relief. You delay a decision until it feels smoother. You adjust your plan so it's less demanding. You wait for reassurance that you're doing the right thing. But discomfort isn't a flaw in the process. It is the process. The moment you start changing, familiar systems lose control. Old habits resist. Old patterns push back. And your mind interprets that resistance as danger. So you step away, just slightly, enough to feel stable again. Enough to return to what you know. Carl Jung captured this perfectly. The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. You don't remove discomfort by thinking harder. You outgrow it by staying present while it's there. Most people never change because they keep trying to make growth comfortable. They want certainty before commitment, confidence before action, relief before movement. But every meaningful shift requires you to stay in attention without escaping it. Not forever. Just long enough for something new to form. Here's the moment that decides everything. Do you interpret discomfort as a warning, or as proof that something real is happening? Because once you stop trying to eliminate it, discomfort loses its power. It stops being a signal to retreat and becomes a signal to stay. And when that happens, all 5 things collapse at once. You stop waiting. You stop protecting old versions of yourself. You stop explaining. You stop mistaking awareness for progress. And without realizing it, you finally change. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped getting in the way. By now, you've probably noticed a pattern. Every time you try to grow, there's a moment when things feel worse before they feel better. You try to act differently, speak differently, make a different choice. And suddenly, the familiar life you built starts pushing back. So why change feels like loss before it feels like freedom? The hardest part about real change isn't the doing. It's what you leave behind. Because every shift asks you to shed something you've carried for years. Habits, routines, ways of thinking, even the version of yourself that used to feel safe. At first, this feels like loss. You notice it in subtle ways. A conversation that once flowed easily now feels tense. A place or schedule that used to feel comfortable now feels confining. Even your own mind seems to resist, replaying old patterns or pointing out reasons to step back. It's the friction you can't avoid. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And here's the key. It's not about some metaphysical soul in a spiritual sense. It's about your internal structure, the unexamined frameworks you've built to navigate life. Every time you try to change, these frameworks loosen, and that disorientation feels like a threat. That's why discomfort shows up. That's why hesitation lingers. That's why you feel like something is slipping away. And yet, it isn't actually loss. It's the prelude to freedom. Because the pieces you're letting go of aren't the real you. They're the adaptations that kept you safe, predictable, or acceptable to others. They're the outdated strategies you learned to survive, not to thrive. Here's a scenario that might hit close to home. You've been known as the steady one, the one who doesn't make waves. People rely on you for consistency. Then you start acting differently, speaking your mind more, taking bold steps, standing your ground. Suddenly, you feel uneasy. The old praise and approval don't arrive in the way they used to. Even your own thoughts question whether you're making a mistake. Your instinct? Step back. Return to comfort. Keep the old self alive. But here's the secret most people never realize. That tension, that feeling of losing, is the threshold to change. It's the signal that your old patterns no longer control you. It's proof that freedom, real freedom, is on the other side. And this is why so many people stop short. Because humans are wired to avoid loss. We fear the gap, the empty space between who we were and who we might become. But growth doesn't happen by holding on. It happens in that gap. The real trick is learning to stay in the tension without panicking, to lean into discomfort and see it as evidence that something important is happening. Because the moment you stop framing change as loss, the moment you let go of the safety net of familiarity, you start feeling the first hints of freedom. And freedom isn't immediate. It's quiet, incremental, and often invisible at first. But when you start noticing it, you realize you weren't losing anything that mattered. You were shedding the weight that kept you stuck. This is the turning point, the moment where most people either quit or push through. And if you push through, you're ready to confront the final force that silently blocks change. The one that, if left unchallenged, will undo everything else. If you've made it this far, you might be starting to notice a pattern. Change isn't just hard. It's designed to feel impossible at the moments that matter most. Every single step forward comes with friction, tension, and discomfort. And that friction triggers an instinct almost everyone falls prey to. Which brings us to this next section. So why most people stop right before it works? It's frustrating to admit, but the timing of human resistance is almost perfectly cruel. You'll be making progress, maybe small steps at first, maybe a sudden insight that shakes something loose. And just when the momentum starts to build, the pressure hits. It's subtle, not dramatic, but it's enough to make you pause. You start questioning yourself. Am I ready for this? Is this really me? What if I fail? What if it doesn't work? And suddenly, all the reasons to keep going start to look like risks. Why? Because the moment you're about to break through, everything inside you that kept you safe begins to push back. Old habits, familiar fears, long-held identities, they're all converging at once. They know this is the point where you might finally step outside the patterns that have controlled you. And so they fight. This is the point most people don't talk about. It's not that they lack willpower. It's not that they haven't learned the principles. It's biology, psychology, and habit converging. Your brain interprets discomfort as threat. Your ego interprets uncertainty as risk. Your environment interprets change as disruption. All at the same time. Carl Jung described this tension when he said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Because complete self-acceptance doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in chaos, in resistance, in moments that make you second-guess everything. And that's exactly why most people stop. They see the friction, feel the unease, and assume it's a signal to retreat. They think, if it hurts or feels uncertain, it's the wrong path. But that's the paradox. The very discomfort, the very resistance, is proof you're on the right track. It's the tipping point, the threshold between who you were and who you're becoming. The difference between quitting and transformation is simply noticing this moment and pushing through it. Because right beyond that pause, that hesitation, is exactly where things start to shift. Patterns begin to unravel. Old identities loosen. Insight becomes action. Discomfort turns into growth. The problem is, most people never get there. They stop just before the breakthrough, thinking the struggle means failure, when in reality it means progress. And understanding this is critical, because if you can recognize the pause, the moment of tension, you can train yourself to stay in it. You can choose to see discomfort as a compass, rather than a warning. And once you do that, once you stop quitting right before it works, you're already halfway to real, lasting change. By now, you've seen the obstacles clearly, the habits, the friction, the discomfort. You know the forces that hold people back and the patterns that make change feel impossible. But here's a question most people never pause to ask. What actually stays the same when you don't change? Because part of the problem isn't just failing to grow. It's failing to notice what's being reinforced every time you stay stuck. When you wait to feel ready, what stays the same? Your fears, your doubts, your sense that the world is too big, too fast, or too complicated for you to navigate. The same old excuses quietly cement themselves, layer by layer, into your routines. When you protect an old identity, what stays the same? Your predictability, the way others see you, and how you see yourself. That familiar version of you that's safe, accepted, and entirely unchallenged. You might feel secure, but that security comes with a hidden cost: stagnation. People continue to treat you the same way, and you continue to expect the same outcomes, over and over again. When you over-explain yourself, what stays the same? Your lack of self-trust. The subtle habit of outsourcing validation to others. You still hesitate before acting. You still let approval guide your decisions. Every explanation you give is a small reinforcement of old insecurity. When you confuse insight with change, what stays the same? Your patterns. Your behaviors repeat themselves even though you understand them. Awareness alone doesn't touch the root. It's like shining a light on a locked door and hoping it opens by itself. The door stays closed, the pattern remains, and your frustration grows. So here's the truth. Real change doesn't come from motivation. insight, or waiting for the perfect moment. It comes from stopping the habits that keep you stuck, stopping the waiting, the hiding, the over-explaining, the false comfort, and the confusion between knowing and doing. If this video helped you see one thing you've been unknowingly repeating, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more insights on how to finally break the cycle.